So hello to everyone, and thank you so much for coming to tonight's lecture on anxiety. I want to actually open the lecture by talking about the irony of me standing up here today giving you a lecture on anxiety when it's actually this lecture that's given me anxiety for the past number of weeks. So just to go through our agenda for today, we are going to talk about anxiety, how it works biologically and psychologically, so how it presents in our body and in our mind. We're going to have a look at the CBT model, that our thoughts and our behaviours influence how we feel. We're going to look at why we get anxious and at times why we become over anxious. And then we're going to look at some helpful ways for you to manage your anxiety. So the American Psychological Association defines anxiety as an emotion characterised by feelings of tension, worried thoughts and physical changes, such as sweating, palpitations, dizziness and shakiness. So all of us here have experienced anxiety in our lives. And if you've met someone who told you that they aren't anxious, they are lying, because it's part of our biological wiring. So anxiety isn't all bad. It can actually be quite helpful. So at certain times and up to a point when it's working the way it's supposed to, anxiety is our body's built-in warning system. So its entire job is to detect potential dangers, alert us to threats, and keep us safe. For example, tonight when you get home, if you were to smell smoke in the house, you will react quicker than you've ever reacted. You'll be faster than you've ever been before, and you will have the kids up and out of the house in record speed. And we have anxiety to thank for that. The thing about anxiety is it doesn't live in the here and the now. So anxiety is almost always what's coming in the future, or maybe something that's happened in the past. So if you think about it for a second, the last time you were feeling really stressed, worried, embarrassed, overwhelmed, or any variant of uncomfortable, was it based on what was happening at that moment in time? Or was it something that had happened previously, or something you were worried about coming in the future? It's also very important to mention that although anxiety feels intense when it's happening and really uncomfortable, anxiety can't hurt us. So it doesn't hurt to feel anxious. And even when you're feeling really intense symptoms of anxiety like panic, it's physically impossible to become too anxious. So our body is well able to handle it. So just to further prove my point that anxiety can be good, we have the Yerkes and the Dodson law bell curve. So this has been around since about 1908, and it was created by two psychologists, Robert Yerkes and John Dodson. So it's a law, the law is a model of the relationship between anxiety and stress and between task performance. So it proposes that you reach your peak level of performance with an intermediate amount of stress. So too little anxiety or too much anxiety results in poor performance. So if we look at the vertical axis here, we have our performance from weak to strong, and along the horizontal axis here, we have our anxiety from low to high. So as you can see there in the middle of the curve, the optimal state of anxiety and optimal performance come together in the middle. So a moderate amount of stress can be really helpful. When it's manageable, it can be really motivational and it can actually be performance enhancing. It's like that little extra push you need when there's a deadline looming, or maybe when there's a promotion up for grabs. If it's something that you want, a moderate amount of stress can be really helpful. So in order to conceptualize this, if we think of the classic set of Leaving Cert students. So over here on the left, we have the student that I'm sure all of us know, the one that doesn't know what he wants to put on the CAO, don't know what they want to do in the future, and actually mum holds the anxiety for both him and herself. But this student won't perform to the best of their ability, and it's because they're not interested in what they're doing. In the middle here, you have the optimal anxiety and optimal performance. So you get that student who's worked hard, whose anxiety is manageable, and on the day of the exam is able to perform. And then on the right side here, we also see low performance with high levels of anxiety. And we all know, again, a Leaving Cert student who's put in all the hard work, has done all the extra grinds and everything, but when it comes to the day of the exams, they're not able to perform to their best of their ability. And that's because in that really high level of stress, you've got the fight, flight, or freeze response. So in these situations, the stress and anxiety are ramping up to an unmanageable level and therefore affecting performance. So I've touched there on the fight, flight, or freeze response. So while I was doing a bit of research for this, I was looking online and found this really lovely video by this online psychology program called Dodson. And they explain the fight, flight, or freeze response in a really lovely way with some lovely graphics. So I'm just going to show you a short video.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight, or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects.
Are we all still with me? We understood the video? Very good. So as we can see from the video, the fight or flight response was really handy for us back in the day when we were built to be cavemen and cave women, and we were built to run and fight and flee. And in fairness, our bodies have survived all these years because we're really good at it. So anxiety has been our friend and it has been helpful. But our body isn't really built for the modern day stresses. So we don't live in the jungle. We don't live in danger at all times. Like, we work in offices, we drive to and from those offices or use public transport. And I suppose in today's modern world, the stresses that we face, it's not very helpful when our body goes into a fight or flight response when you've got an email from your boss, or maybe when you get a bill from the bank. So the stresses that we feel in the modern world, our body is unsuited to deal with. So because of this, sometimes we can feel really intense anxiety. Like we said, we all feel anxiety, it's normal. But too much anxiety or constantly being anxious can be really harmful to our body, both biologically and psychologically. So anxiety becomes a problem When anxious feelings are overwhelming and affect our performance. When anxiety is so strong that it stops us doing things we need to do. When anxiety is so strong that we begin to have panic attacks. When anxiety is not short-lived but becomes long-lasting, entrenched and pervades many aspects of our lives. Or maybe we find that we're worrying all the time, perhaps about things that are a normal part of everyday life, or you're worrying about things that may not happen, or in fact you find that you're worrying about worrying. So how do we treat anxiety that when it becomes clinically significant and maybe someone has presented to a GP or to our hospital here or to one of our clinics? So the Psychosocial Model was first conceptualized by George Engel in 1977. And it's an approach we use here in healthcare, and it's to understand mental and physical health through a multi-system lens. So understanding the influence of biology, psychology, and our social environment. So we understand that these systems overlap and interact with each other and predicts the person's well-being or risk of illness, and also understanding how these all influence each other makes for more effective treatment. So biology here refers to our genetics, our physical health, and the function of our organ systems. So our physical health impacts our mental health for multiple reasons. So our brain is an organ, just like any other organ in the body, and it can become unwell. Next, we've got psychological. So that refers to our mental health. So unhelpful and maladaptive moods, thoughts and behaviours can all be symptoms of mental health conditions, and in turn can contribute to our overall health. Mental health and behaviour can be cyclical. So for example, an individual who self-isolates as a symptom of anxiety may experience increased symptoms of anxiety due to that isolation. And then finally, we look at the social environment, so changes in people's environment which may affect people positively or negatively. So just in order to conceptualize how this works, we'll use the guinea pig on stage, e.g. me, as an example. So biologically, what's happening right now for me? I've got a racing heart, I'm a bit sweaty, I feel a bit nauseous. Psychological, it's the worries going on in my head. Am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And my social environment is a room full of people I've never met staring at me. So you can understand how these interact for my overall state. So then we look at a treatment plan. And with everything, one thing isn't going to suit every person. So I've just outlined some important parts of each system which you can concentrate on if you're looking to help yourself and manage anxiety. So for some people, diet is really important. What you're feeding yourself, what you're drinking. Are you drinking a huge amount of caffeine? Maybe 4 or 5 cups in the morning, and then you're wondering why you feel a bit anxious or shaky in the afternoon. Are you prioritizing your sleep and your rest? Like, what time are you going to bed at night? What are you doing before you go to bed? How well are you sleeping? Rest also doesn't have to be sleep, but giving yourself time and your body to relax. For other people, exercise may be a huge part of keeping themselves well. We know that exercise releases all the feel-good hormones which help lift our mood. And for a lot of people, sometimes medication can be useful. If the symptoms biologically or psychologically become too overwhelming, medication can be really helpful in helping people so they can actually engage in these techniques or maybe engage in therapy. So on the psychological side, most importantly, I think there's personal reflection. You need to spend a little bit of time thinking, what are my triggers? Why are they my triggers? And that may be something you're able to do yourself, or you may want to seek a bit of support, and a therapist may be able to help you with that. So in terms of therapy, that would be like cognitive behavioral therapy, which I do here in the hospital, or any form of psychological help can be really helpful. There's also a huge amount of research behind meditation and how beneficial it is for managing anxiety. So who here really can say that they spend 3 or 4 minutes every day checking in with themselves, saying, how do I feel? What's going on in my body? Probably not many of us. So there's huge of research saying if you can spend those couple of minutes with yourself every day, acknowledge what's going on, that you can actually reduce your anxiety. And then in terms of social treatment, we're looking at increasing social support and decreasing social pressure. So I can't leave the biological side of anxiety without talking about the brain, but I promise I'm going to keep it really short, and I hope I haven't lost you since putting up this slide. So the information that we pick up from our environment, be it what we see, what we smell, what we hear, that information is passed in two directions. So down to the amygdala, which is this almond-shaped structure, and it lies within our limbic, so our unconscious brain. And then up to the frontal lobes along here, and that's in our conscious brain. So the pathway to the amygdala is known as the low road because it's extremely fast. And the road to the frontal cortex is known as the high road because it takes several milliseconds after the amygdala, and especially when you're in the midst of overwhelming, threatening experience. So if you think of the central function of the amygdala is like the brain's smoke detector. So it's to identify whether incoming information is relevant for our survival. So if the amygdala senses a threat, say a potential collision on the road in front of you or a person on the street who looks threatening, it sends an instant message down the brainstem, which recruits the stress hormone system and the automatic nervous system to orchestrate a full body response. So because the amygdala processes the information faster than the frontal lobes do, sometimes our body's actually in movement before we've actually identified what the threat is. So the amygdala triggers the release of powerful stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, and that's what makes our heart rate, blood pressure, rate of breathing increase. So if the amygdala is the brain's smoke detector, then we'll look at the frontal lobes as an aerial view of the situation. So the frontal lobes are what ask you, is that smoke I smell the house on fire, or did someone burn something in the kitchen? But the amygdala doesn't make such judgments, it just has you moving before you can even think. So a good example of amygdala activation, I'm sure most, if not all of you, watched the rugby match on Saturday night. So we saw in the second half a bit of an incident, I suppose, with Johnny Sexton, where there was a perceived threat, and actually all of the lads reacted in a very primitive manner in getting rid of the threat. And you can see how that worked out. So we'll get into the psychological side of anxiety. So our body is not built for the modern day anxiety, like we've said. It doesn't feel nice and we want to push it away. So sometimes we can pick up maladaptive coping strategies. So maybe drinking as an escape from the anxiety, maybe using drugs, or maybe engaging in safety behaviours. So safety behaviours are things that you might do to feel a bit safer or less anxious in the situation. Maybe like carrying a bit of medication with you in case, or maybe sitting beside the door at a public lecture in case you need to get out. But then some people start completely avoiding the things that make them anxious. And actually, avoidance is a function of anxiety because, like I said, we want to push it away and we want to get away from the threat. But avoidance actually makes it worse. The more you avoid something that makes you anxious, the more anxiety you will have. So as we can see here, we feel anxiety, we avoid it, we get short-term relief, and then long-term anxiety growth. So for example, if there's a dinner that you don't want to go to because there's people there that make you feel uncomfortable. If you say no to that dinner the first time, you feel great. You can sit in now, things are fine. But what happens the next time that dinner comes up? The anxiety is going to be sky high again, and again you're left in a situation where you either need to avoid or face into the fear. So in CBT, we look at the behavioural side. So we actually believe that facing your fear is the best thing, and going towards the fear or the anxiety is again the best thing. So I want to show you our behavioural exposure and response prevention. So I think everybody can remember their first time getting into a car to drive. So the first time you got into the car, the anxiety level was absolutely sky high. You were so nervous, everything was going on in your body, but you sat with it, you got through it, the anxiety comes down, and you've now told your body, okay, maybe I didn't really enjoy that, and maybe I felt uncomfortable, but I can manage. But with avoidance, you never teach your body that, and your body never acclimatizes. So we can see the second time we got into the car, the anxiety was less, the third time less again, the fourth time, and I think anyone who drove here tonight can say they got into the car pretty automatically and didn't have an anxiety. So we also have a look at the short-term and long-term consequences of avoidance. So if we avoid things that make us anxious, what are the implications for our life? So if I decide that I don't like doing the food shopping because it makes me really anxious and I'm not going to do it anymore, what implications does that have then for me and my life? It's going to cause social isolation, starvation if I don't think of any other way to get it. So we can see that facing into the anxiety, although really uncomfortable, is the best way to manage. So a little introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy. So it's a psychological treatment and it's practiced by many therapists worldwide. So CBT theory suggests that our thoughts, our emotion, our body sensations and our behaviours are all connected, and that what we think affects what we do. So there's been thousands of research indicating that CBT is an effective treatment for anxiety. And CBT is flexible too. It can be used across the lifespan, from children to adolescents, adults, and to older people. So when people feel worried or distressed, we often fall into patterns of thinking and responding that can worsen how we feel. So CBT works to help us notice and change problematic thinking styles or behavioural patterns so we can feel a little bit better. So next, a little bit on emotions. So in CBT, we really acknowledge that once an emotion is present, it's accompanied by additional thoughts that support or strengthen that emotion. And when we're feeling that really intense emotion, we are likely to distort or discount or disregard information that contradicts how we're feeling. So it's helpful to recognize when you're thinking in a distorted way, because this understanding provides the first step towards a more balanced thought process and therefore better emotional states. So these are our unhelpful thinking styles. I'll go through them now, but I think most of us can identify with one, if not many, if not all of them. So the mental filter is this thinking style involves a filtering in and filtering out process. So it's like a tunnel vision, and it focuses only on one part of the situation and ignores the rest. Mind reading. As the name suggests, this is where we jump to conclusions because we assume that we know what the other person is thinking, or we have the rationale behind someone's behaviours. So this happens to be one of the most common unhelpful thinking styles, and I think we've all probably held a crystal ball at some point in our lives. Prediction is quite similar. It's when you jump to conclusions and start making predictions about what's going to happen on a future occasion. So these are often predictions where you overestimate the negative emotions or experiences that you're likely to encounter. Then we have compare and despair. So looking at others and comparing them to yourself. And this can be really unhelpful because it can contribute to anxiety feelings, feelings of shame, feelings of envy, leading to self-criticism, a lack of self-worth, and rapidly undermines any confidence. So especially in today's world of social media, we all know that Instagram is a picture of the best of everyone's lives. I mean, no one ever posts a really challenging or horrible day that we've had. So we need to be really careful in looking at what's online and what is actually realistic. The critical self is tending to find fault with your own actions or your own motives. Shoulds and musts, giving yourself a, I should do this, I must do this, and putting that pressure on. Then judgments. So this type of thinking is where we make judgment based on how we're feeling. So we assume that because we feel a certain way, then it must be related to the situation. So for example, I feel really anxious, it must be dangerous. Or I feel really bad, this must be awful. Emotional reasoning involves basing your view of situations or yourself on the way you're feeling. Mountains out of molehills are thinking of small things that could go wrong, would be the end of the world, and think of only the worst case scenarios for all the events coming up. Catastrophizing is when we blow things out of proportion, we view situations as terrible, dreadful, horrible, even though the reality is the problem could be quite small. Black and white thinking is like all or nothing thinking. You tend only to see one extreme or the other. So with this thinking, you're either right or wrong, you're either good or bad, there's no in between, and there's no shades of grey. And then memories is current situations and events can trigger upsetting memories, leading us to believe that the situation we're in now is dangerous rather than in the past. So in CBT, we help our clients by identifying and noticing their unhelpful thinking style, and then very gently beginning to challenge the thoughts, looking for evidence to and for that thought. And then sometimes we look at cognitive restructuring, so rewriting that thought into something a bit more balanced and realistic. And then we're also very mindful. So putting your thoughts on trial is one of my favorite concepts that I learned from CBT, so I had to include it today. So the idea behind it is if you have a thought that's really worrying you or you're thinking about all the time, why don't you put the thought on trial and throw your thought up there at the top of the sheet. And on one side you have the defense lawyer who's giving the evidence for the thought, and on the other side you have the prosecution lawyer who's giving you evidence against the thought. And if you actually sit, I know a lot of my clients in CBT actually really enjoy this, and they sit and they make all the lists for both sides and they think about it, and then they come out with the judge's verdict at the end. And the judge's verdict basically tells us if it's a thought worth having or whether we need to throw it out. So we're going to look now at some helpful ways to manage your anxiety. The first one, so we have a lovely picture of a man and his dog going for a walk. And the question is the mind full or are you mindful? So mindfulness is the practice of purposely focusing your attention into the present moment and accepting it without judgment. So research shows the role of mindfulness in stress reduction and overall happiness. So it's a really busy world out there. A lot of the time we can miss out on what we're doing or when we're feeling. Like this morning, did you notice if you were well rested when you woke up, or were you already downstairs cooking the children's breakfast? When you're on your way into work, did you notice what colour of leaves there was on the trees, or were you looking at the car in front of you who was causing you to be late for work? So it's really important to be present in the now, like we talked about earlier, just taking that few minutes every day to check in with yourself. So stress reduction is one of the most common reasons why people try meditation. So normally mental health and physical stress can cause increased stress hormone of cortisol. And cortisol produces many of the harmful effects of stress, such as disrupted sleep. It promotes depression and anxiety, increases blood pressure, and contributes to fatigue and cloudy thinking. So there was an 8-week study done on meditation called mindfulness meditation, and it showed that it actually reduced all the inflammatory response in people's bodies that cause health issues. The other lovely thing I think about meditation is studies have found that it can actually generate kindness. So there's a specific type of meditation called metta, and it's all about feeling positive feelings and actions towards yourself and others. So through practice, people learn then to extend those feelings of kindness not only onto themselves, but to their friends, their families, and even to people they don't like eventually. Next up then we have yoga. So yoga really helps the mind and the body connection. So yoga refers to the union of your body and your mind. A lot of the time, like we said, it's a busy world and we can walk around in our head and not in the moment. But yoga helps you to experience your body in the present moment, becoming aware of sensations and experiences within your body. And it allows a conversation to start between the mind and the body. Yoga is also very good at processing difficult emotions. So emotion is energy in motion. So when we stay still for too long or we don't feel good in our body, energy can get stuck in the body and we can be left feeling sluggish or really heavy in the body. Yoga can also develop self-awareness by experiencing ourselves as we are without judgment, expectations, or reactions. So allowing time to notice ourselves, how we're feeling and what's going on. Yoga actually results in better emotional regulation by bringing balance to the nervous system and creating a greater space between the stimulus and the response. So between the emotional reaction and the rational response. It can also have a relaxing effect on the body as we strengthen the vagal tone and we allow the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest, to soothe our body's response. And also a regular yoga practice can also add structure and routine to your day and can also make you meet like-minded people who are interested in the same activities. So breathing techniques are also a highly effective way for managing anxiety because it directly influences our automatic nervous system, which regulates our body's involuntary response, which is the fight, flight or freeze, like we spoke about. So the fight or flight is characterized by rapid, shallow breathing and increased heart rate. And by engaging in breathing techniques, we can calm the body and help manage the anxiety more effectively. So I put a couple of options on the board. If you go online, again, no one size fits all, so you'll find one that you prefer doing. And the important thing about breathing techniques is to practice them outside of the times that you're feeling anxious. So if you're feeling overwhelming anxiety and you say, I'm going to start breathing for the first time, it will have a good effect. But you can become really good at the breathing when you're doing it every day, when it's a part of your routine, and then in times of anxiety, it's really beneficial. So we've got the 4-7-8, which is obviously inhaling for 4, holding for 7, and breathing out for 8. And then you've also got box breathing, which is inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4. And then one actually that a lot of my patients think is really good and in an overwhelming time is simply with your hand, just inhaling while you're going up your finger, down again, and just continue going around. And sometimes that can help to have a visual as well as the breathing. And I can't mention breathing techniques without mentioning Wim Hof. So Wim Hof is quite famous. I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He is a Dutch man who actually experienced the loss of his wife many years ago and was dealing with the grieving process and really struggling with it. And Wim found that the only way for a bit of reprieve from that anxiety was actually getting himself into cold water and engaging really good breathing techniques. And he found that this really helped. So Wim Hof has actually gone on, if you've heard of ice baths and their benefits in mental health, that's all back from Wim Hof. So he is brilliant. He has workshops all over the world and you can learn this breathing technique, which the man has walked up Mount Everest in a pair of boxers and he's survived. And he's also been injected with influenza in a hospital and had no reactions on any of the monitors. So I don't know what he's doing, but he's doing something correct. So just important to note that some people in this room may experience anxiety and may have a diagnosis. So we see some diagnosis like general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, social anxiety disorder, and separation anxiety disorder. But it's very important to know that whether you have a diagnosis of anxiety or whether you're struggling with day-to-day anxiety, the next few slides are some positive steps to well-being that we can all take. And they may seem quite basic, but again, when you're feeling really anxious, when things become overwhelming, we look back and focus on the basics. So our first one here is to be kind to yourself. So this simply means recognizing that we're all human and we're all trying our best. So instead of berating yourselves when you mess up or things don't work out, it's about treating ourselves with a bit of kindness and a bit of compassion. Like we've mentioned, exercises cause your brain to release feel-good chemicals like endorphins and serotonin, which help to improve your mood. So something as simple as getting the dog on the lead and going for a walk around the block if you're feeling kind of anxious can be really helpful to bring the body down. It's really important to spend time outside, and actually being in nature naturally reduces stress by relaxing our nervous system. So connect with others. It's really important to have stable, healthy relationships. So people that we can lean on in times of stress and offer support. So something as basic as organising to see your friend during the week or making a call to that person that you haven't seen in months. It's really important to have social connection. And actually there was a meta-analysis conducted by Julianne Holt, who's a psychologist from Brigham University, and that she found that a lack of social connection can actually heighten your health risks as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having alcohol dependency syndrome. So that's pretty shocking. Then we have drinking drugs, just to be aware, like we said, of maladaptive coping. Obviously, small amounts of alcohol can be fine, but really important to look at the effects of alcohol. Alcohol is, when we drink it, it's a euphoriant. We feel great. We feel all the stresses leave us on a Friday evening. But actually, on Friday, as you're going to sleep, that alcohol is coming out of your system, and on Saturday morning, you're going to feel that heightened anxiety. So just really careful to use in moderation. Then, like we've mentioned before, eating healthy and looking at what you're putting into your body. So caffeine, like we were saying, just to be really mindful. Caffeine has a half-life of about 10 to 12 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee in the morning at 9 o'clock, at 9 o'clock that evening, there's still about half of the caffeine in your system. And then a lot of us are wondering why we have afternoon coffees and can't sleep that night. Then importantly, to make time for yourself, to allow yourself time to chill out and relax, find things that suit you and engage. Different things work for different people. But back to that kind of self-care piece, identifying when maybe you're in a time where you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed and looking at the small things that help you feel better. And balance sleep. So make sure you're in a healthy sleep cycle. What time are you going to sleep? How much sleep are you getting? Because we have to remember that poor sleep can make it really, really difficult to cope with the day-to-day stresses. So I just wanted to pop this up as we're coming to the end of the lecture, just to help people recognize how they can see anxiety in themselves and others. So remember that if you are experiencing anxiety, it is completely normal. But if you do feel like your anxiety is becoming a little bit overwhelming or unmanageable, there are so many effective treatments for you out there. So whether it's CBT or psychological treatment, there is help out there. So please do not struggle with anxiety by yourself. And finally, I just want to thank you all so much for coming here tonight, and I look forward to your questions in a short time. And I just want to leave you with this lovely message that I love about anxiety, and it's that anxiety overestimates the danger and underestimates our ability to cope. Thank you.